Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sticking around for this afternoon. Of course, the three of us believe that this is the best discussion you're going to have all day today because we're talking about the future, and in particular, your future. So I'm just going to start off by telling you or sharing with you what I've discovered is the definition of a disruptive producer. Each of us, we discovered in our preliminary conversations to today's panel is that we all had slightly different takes on what it means. So I thought I'd better take the time and see what Wikipedia says, because of course they would know. The term was first coined in 1995 by a guy named Clayton Christensen, if you didn't know that. And it's all about disruptive innovation. It's about using innovation in a way to break down preconceived and tried and tested models of business and approaching your product in a completely different way, which would upset the normal paradigm but may have more impact. So coming out of that is the term significant societal impact, and that's really what brings us to the work that these women are engaged in, because each of them is making a mark in the industry, and one through documentary and one at the moment through Chloe through drama. So I'd like to just start off by talking about the impact producer, who is, of course, the disruptive producer. So, Madeline, would you like to tell us about your work, please?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure if this is for camera or for me. Do I need this to be noisy? So I'm co-founder of Media Stockade, which is a Sydney-based production company that primarily makes documentary films. I don't know how many of you have been in earlier sessions. Who's sort of met? We've met. Okay, so you've probably seen the reel, and we had a bit of a chat about what Media Stockade does. In one sense, one arm of the business is a production company. We make films, we make documentary films, we tell stories. The second part of Media Stockade is our impact producing arm, and that part of the business is about taking films and surrounding them and distributing them through non-traditional pathways. So traditional pathways, broadcast TV, or possibly a theatrical release with a kind of a larger distributor. What's sort of non-traditional distribution, although it's actually becoming very commonplace these days, is bespoke cinema on demand distribution via online, also different kind of online platforms, and in particular kind of hybrid models of distribution. So you are mixing together both traditional and non-traditional and kind of creating a bespoke delivery of your film. In particular, we've been involved with the Good Pitch project, which is originated in the UK with BritDoc, and then came to Australia through Shark Island and has run these 3 big events at the Opera House the last 3 years in a row, at which the model is about bringing together kind of supporters of films for their distribution through education, through political advocacy, through community campaigns, with the aim of progressive social change via storytelling. And I guess the background behind that is that, documentaries in particular, stories anyway, I think, have the potential to kind of raise awareness, inspire us to act and change. And documentaries, in particular, interested in being agents of social change, of being catalysts for change, to raise awareness and disrupt the world in positive ways. I guess that's it.
So would this be a good time for us to have a look at that work?
Yeah, so look, this is where I'm just wondering what we should do. So I put together a few visual aids. I wasn't quite sure what we needed to show. Should we just, we could show that for the people that haven't seen the Media Stockade trailer, maybe we should show that just so you get a sense of the sort of tone and style of what we do. Just getting our visual aid. If you go next one, and click on that, it'll play. No sound?
And this is home. This is what we are fighting for. Why don't you pack up and leave?
There comes the one the beast that is forcing the necessity of the story.
Everything that's happened, totally my fault.
You guys are the ones here that made the commitment to be different.
Who else is going to stand up and fight for what is right?
How do we now throw that switch and start thinking positives about all this?
We will fight with our brain.
Get knocked off your bike and get back up and get on.
He was a father, and it was his son. There was just so much miscommunication.
I understand people don't change.
You honestly believe that you're a burden on people? Unfortunately, she won't have vision in her lifetime.
He's someone that I love. Tell him that this scares me.
It's not just for me, with myself, others.
So, and just pop along to the next slide. So, this is the body of work that we've done the last few years, and all of them have got very different ways of they were financed and have been distributed. Some of them traditionally through broadcasts, and others not. Of the I'm a Girl is a film that was directed and produced by my co-founder in Media Stockade, Rebecca Barry, and I think that's I think a good example of a kind of what would be considered part of the kind of disrupted producer model. So it didn't have any broadcaster money. Nobody wanted to make the film. It's a story about gender inequality, and it was seen. It just didn't excite the broadcasters. That's not to say that it wasn't a great idea, and really actually has turned into an absolutely beautiful film that's travelled very well in festivals, had a huge outreach and screening campaign around it, and actually has ended up being bought by like multiple TV stations. It's now showing on National Geographic internationally and on the ABC here. But at the time it began, it was a film that wanted to tell a story and inspire people to raise awareness and to create change around the issues of gender inequality, and it looked at 6 girls around the world who were about 16, 17 years old, and just sort of did a kind of a portrait of each one of them and the situations they were all in, all struggling with different particular issues, anything from mental health to education. There's a girl in Afghanistan that can't get to school, through to Kim Se, who's a girl who's a prostitute and is trying to find a way out of that. Like just a bunch of issues that affect young women today, and it was funded philanthropically. So it just went around the kind of traditional way of funding, and there were sort of several major partners, from some larger philanthropic trusts through to people like Intrepid Travel, like who saw it as a way of kind of contributing something of value, but also aligned with their brand of kind of responsible travel. And the film was made, and it was then distributed. It did have a theatrical release, but where it really kind of found its pathway was through kind of community hosted screenings. So that's people, it's a form of cinema on demand, but this was a few years ago, before Leapfrog, or it's called Demand Film now, or FanForce, had really kind of arrived. So it really found a pathway through simply a website, a really amazing network of kind of contacts from the partners that had funded it. And we had 200 screenings around Australia from requests sent into us. We want to show this film to our community. People would find a venue, hire a cinema, invite a guest list, anything from 20 to, 600 people would come to those screenings, and it kind of just sort of grew all the way around Australia. Sometimes Beck would go as a filmmaker, sometimes she wouldn't, but it really kind of had a very organic kind of distribution pattern, which we hadn't really quite anticipated. We were intending to distribute it that way, but it was more successful than we realised or kind of imagined. It then kind of went on to have a similar kind of cinema on demand release through Gather in the States, and now is kind of playing on television. It's not an activist film, but it is a film with an agenda. So it kind of, I guess, is a very kind of classic documentary in terms of really wanting to shift something about the world by telling a really compelling and dramatic story to an audience. And the way it wouldn't have found an audience because we couldn't get it funded. Beck was selected to Hot Doc. She pitched it everywhere around the place, could not get a broadcaster across the line. Eventually found another completely separate funding stream to fund. It's an international doco. It's like 6 countries, one of them Afghanistan. Like, it was tricky to get there and expensive to travel. But she got it made, and then it actually has had a very successful life in distribution sense. And also it's had some really great positive change. You know, it's both for some of the characters in the film who've been supported through some of those community groups, literally saying, well, we want to send some people to school in Afghanistan, and they've gone out and fundraised and made that happen through to, it's one of the most successful educational downloads from ATOM, the Australian Teachers of Media. So it's used as a classroom resource all around Australia, and there's a part of the website where you can send a postcard to the girls, and every now and again we can see it's been used in the classroom because like 30 postcards suddenly go off to Aziza or something like that. I think I might just pass over to Chloe now. That's sort of our pathway. So disruptive in the sense of non-traditional, using the new technologies that allow us to distribute in a more direct sense to an audience. I have to say it's not easier to do it that way, but it means that you're not using a traditional distributor, and theatrical documentaries are very difficult sell or to make any kind of return on them. So this is a way of having far lower upfront costs, a slower distribution rollout, but in the end kind of a really effective one, and actually kind of something that does generate revenue, does support itself, sustain itself, for filmmakers to be sustainable, to have some kind of back end income coming in. And possibly disruptive in the sense of the way it was financed, which was a non-traditional way for documentary to be financed.
So you said that this all grew organically. This is the first time that you've done it in that way?
That film was the first film that we did under Media Stockade. But I mean, people have been showcasing films, through communities forever. But we've got new technologies that allow us, through cinema on demand, to kind of do this in a more organised and kind of effective way, and to measure it actually better as well.
Yeah.
And the other front part of it is kind of the model of philanthropic funding has also existed in documentary, but it's kind of become more formalised because we've got an organisation called the Documentary Australia Foundation, and because we had a very high-profile, good pitch campaign which ran 3 events over 3 years, which collected and really amplified interest in philanthropic giving from both private donors and also institutions, by kind of giving it a real platform and explaining, I guess, the value of social impact documentary, of film as an agent of change, as a catalyst for positive social change.
So I would imagine your company would have much more confidence now in approaching a project in this lateral kind of way, now that you having done that.
I think we build a wraparound distribution pattern on everything we do, and not all films suit an impact campaign. It has to be something that has a really deep resonance with a community to want to do it, but some films do, and of those films it makes sense to do that kind of patterning. And also, I guess, we all have to work very hard about generating income, because you want films fully financed before you do them, but essentially they're always difficult ones, and for it to survive, to be sustainable as a producer or a production company, you need to find some way of generating income and not just be in this kind of boom bust cycle of kind of commission and end of production and where's the next commission. And so making all your back end forms of kind of royalty streams work for you, including these kind of community, there's a small fee that goes for showing these things in a public setting. It helps producers kind of sustain themselves.
Thanks. So moving on from social impact and social change to what YouTube defines its most successful content as having 2 elements, and that is one of them is wit and the other one is comedy, which brings me to some of the work that Jungle's doing. And I'd love to hear, and I'm sure everyone would, Chloe, about how you might be approaching your work in a disruptive way.
Yeah,
Yeah, great. So look, I think documentary are fantastic and totally leading the way in terms of this impact space, and the drama world I think can learn a lot from documentary in this regard. Now I've got 2 projects that I've done that have been financed and delivered as official multi-platform productions, and on the drama side of things, we don't call them impact producers per se, but I would call them a multimedia producer or a social media producer or a producing assistant or associate, whatever sort of title we give them on the drama side. On 2 projects in particular, Soulmates and No Activity, I've worked with a secondary producer to produce cross-platform content that rolls out alongside the TV deliverable. So take Soulmates, for example. It was a 6-by-half-hour comedy that we delivered for the ABC, and then season 2 was also NBC Universal. So alongside those 6 episodes, we produced 20 original pieces of comedy content that weren't part of the TV show, that were unique pieces of content that rolled out over YouTube, Facebook and Instagram. We also created unique content for the ABC, for iView and for Triple J, and we also created unique content for NBC Universal to roll out on their CISO platforms. So in terms of delivery, what a nightmare really, because there's so many bits of unique content to be dealing with, a lot of editorial time, a lot of approvals, but what that allows you to do is, in the case of these creatives who grew up on YouTube, they started there, we're actually feeding their original audience, teasing them to come across to the iView platform, then teasing them across to ABC One, and then YouTube has an international audience, so international audiences have seen this content. I think in fact 60% of their online audience was international, so then when it went live on CISO, we were again teasing that audience to move across to jump on the CISO platform. So that multimedia content was really about taking existing audiences, moving eyeballs to a different platform, and then encouraging international distribution. So I think that team worked that format really well, and really made the most of each of those platforms. But the key there was unique content on each platform, so it wasn't about just delivering content for different people sort of over there. It was actually working with them to make unique targeted content for each of those platforms. I think when the idea of multimedia first started, it was just about taking one thing and cutting it into different ways for different platforms. But the evolved multimedia producer is actually working with those individual platforms to create unique and memorable content for those audiences, consuming it in the way that they do. So that's the first example. My second example, and I might get Ken to load the clip here, is No Activity. And the reason why I think this is a wonderful case study for disruptive producing is to do with the way the show was made and the fact that it was the first Australian commission on Stan, the digital SVOD platform. I'll go into the methodology in a second. I'll let you watch it first. Now first, I'm just going to say as a caveat, we didn't cut this pilot and it seems to have every rude joke in the whole show condensed into 2 minutes, so please excuse all the expletives. I promise you the whole show is not about this, but there is a lot of it in there. But so here you go.
Businessman told that his wife Elizabeth had been reported missing from their home.
Oh yeah, gotta go. Righty.
But rest assured we have some of our finest detectives on the job.
Headshots.
Okay, end of drill.
Yes! Nailed that.
There's scientific proof. Babies can be assholes.
Testicles. Bloody to say that. What's a cherry, pal?
It's back. Oh, God.
I'm having an anxiety attack.
The three-time Logie nominated comedy sensation.
I'm not volunteering on some Taylor Swift anymore.
Why can't disabled people wait for the toilet? They're already sitting down.
The Stan original series No Activity returns for a brand new season.
You know, I fuck the flamingos.
Animal.
Oh. temperature with an array of tropical fish. Touch my balls.
Doesn't matter to me. Or if that sticks bigger than your dick.
What the fuck is going on?
There's a son named Jack. Yes. Jack off.
I have your people here. I will kill them. All is on your call.
Ta-ta.
Coffee, hot croissant, energy drink. Stupid.
October 26th. Discover just how film doubled the thin combined with
But this work is not all about vision. It's all the other senses. The smell tower, the humidity. You're legally blind. You're legally an arsehole.
Yeah, like I said, all the rude jokes. I think a boy cut that, but anyway. Okay, so this show, in its DNA, it's a cop show. It's a high, intensity crime, procedural drama, but nothing happens, and that's the whole pitch, right? It's the no activity of the Seinfeld of cop shows. But you might have picked up from the teaser here that the characters never move locations. We only ever shoot characters in a static location, so the cops never move, the police never moves, the criminals never move. And what we've done between these kind of long segments of dialogue where basically you've got two cameras cross-shooting, and on the day we shoot 21 minutes of content a day rather than the standard 8, which a normal TV series of this nature would shoot. So making the whole production period 9 days. And we're able to attract cast like Rose Byrne, Damon Herriman. In season 1 we had Tim Minchin, Jake Johnson from New Girl, Sam Simmons. So the model is we're asking cast to come in for 1 day only to shoot out the whole series. What we did then, because the show started to feel quite claustrophobic, we're always returning to these locations. We got a very low-cost drone. We did 2 half days with the drone shooting across Sydney. Season 1, it was the dockyards. Season 2, you can sort of see that the Doolan Mansion, we called it, and the Sydney Harbour Bridge and sort of the docklands. But these sort of drone shots interspersed with quite static location settings gave us a sense of this expansive Sydney where this, crime saga was playing out, at a rate of knots. But actually nothing's happening. And it's the joke, but it's also how the show is being made. So in that way, we're really disrupting that traditional production process, shooting in 9 days. And I was just saying earlier that the post-production is quite shambolic because we're sort of inventing the story in post. There's key sort of story and plot points that we know we wanted to hit in each episode, but ultimately some of the segments are interchangeable. So sometimes we were taking something from episode 5 and putting it in 1 because it was better and we wanted the pilot to be awesome. And so it's almost like you've shot the thing and the whole, cards are out on the table and we're sort of recutting it all. And there's so many people involved. We've got 2 editors cutting non-stop. We've got 2 assistants. We've had 2 directors. We've got, so it's quite a shambolic process. But in the end, the cost of things comes quite dramatically down when you do it that way, because even post, although we had lots of people working on it at once, we did it in quite a tight post-production period. So look, for us, we pitched this show as from day one we said you're going to get high-end actors, you're going to get high production values. We shot it at 4K, delivered it at 4K. I think we were the first show in Australia to do that. Then Wolf Creek did the same, but so yeah, we're really sort of selling it as high production values, but at a very efficient price point because of this condensed way that we were making it. So yeah, that was our sort of attempt at disrupting the production model, and we've just got another show in early stage development at the moment where we're using that same methodology, different storyline, different sort of set of circumstances, but similarly like shooting it in quite a tight, restricted environment.
Thanks, Chloe. So does this inform the work and the projects that you'll be taking on in the future and the way in which you approach them?
Look, it's not right for every project, but as a philosophy to try and restrict yourself, I think it actually brings out really interesting, creative ways of doing things or ways of thinking about things. And especially in the low budget sector, I think if you can come up with an idea that is restricted in some profound way, actually the way that you might come up with creative solutions might actually be the point of difference for your show, might actually be the thing that sells it, because nobody's ever thought about doing it like that before, so it gives it a bit of an edge in the marketplace. If you come in and try and pitch a workplace comedy set in an office, has somebody done that before? Yeah, but if you can do it, if you can think about that in a new way, use that genre but make it in a different way, or put your own spin on it, then you might have the edge.